She whispered, "Save me, please." The rancher lifted his knife, but what he saw made him back in horror. Jonathan Reed stood alone in the Santa Florenza Canyon, a place where wind howled like ghosts and no birds ever sang. Dust clung to his boots as he stepped closer to the wrecked wagon. The thing lay on its side, wheels splintered, cargo scattered like bones. And there, half hidden in the shadowed wreckage, he saw her. A girl, barely more than 15, her hands bound with rawhide, face streaked with dirt and dried blood. Her lips parted as if forming words that cost too much to speak. "Save me, please," she whispered. Jonathan dropped to one knee, reached for the knife at his belt. As he sliced the bindings, she raised her head. Their eyes met, and he recoiled. What stared back at him wasn't just pain. It was something deeper, something unnatural. Her pupils were wide and strange, as if the light couldn't touch them. It was a look he'd seen only once before. In a nightmare. Years ago, he dreamed of fire and screaming horses, of a pale child standing in the smoke, eyes black as coal. He'd woken gasping, sure it meant nothing. But now that face, the same eyes, was here, alive, watching him. The dream had first come the winter after the fire. Jonathan Reed had buried his wife and boy under a cottonwood tree that never bloomed again. The doctor said the fever took them, but he knew it was the wind. That cursed desert wind, dry and sharp as broken glass, had howled for 3 nights before they died, as if something old and angry was waking beneath the sand. After the funeral, Jonathan rode west until the land grew thin and water vanished. There, high above the cliffs, he built a shack from driftwood and stone. No neighbors, no mail, no God, just wind and silence and time. Years passed like that. He spoke only to his horse, smoked pipe tobacco when it rained, and kept a rifle at his door not out of fear, but habit. Some called it cowardice. Jonathan called it survival. But the dream still came. In it, a fire crackled across the plains. A little girl, barefoot, skin pale as dust, stood within the flames. Her eyes were wrong, hollow, black as coal. She never spoke, only stared. And always, in the dream, she raised one hand and pointed at him. He'd wake then, soaked in sweat, heart hammering. Always alone, always terrified. Until now. Until he saw that look in the canyon girl's eyes. She sagged against the wagon as the ropes fell. Her limbs twitched with weakness. Jonathan pulled her gently free and wrapped her in his coat. She flinched. "It's all right," he said. "You're safe now." Her lips trembled, but she said nothing, just rested her head against his chest. Her skin was ice cold, too cold. It was over 100 degrees in the canyon. Jonathan's horse whinnied from where he'd tied it near a scraggly mesquite tree. He lifted the girl, light as ash, and carried her to the saddle. He didn't ask how she got there, didn't ask who did this to her. He didn't want to know. But the girl's eyes stayed open the whole ride home, fixed on the horizon behind them, as if expecting something, or someone, to follow. That night, Jonathan laid her on the cot and boiled water. He cleaned her wounds, dabbed ointment, crushed herbs for fever. She didn't resist, didn't cry, only watched him. "Name?" he asked softly. She blinked. "Ellie," she said. "Ellie Marsh." Her voice was flat, like someone remembering a story instead of telling their own. "How'd you end up out there?" "They took me. 3 men. Dragged me from the stagecoach." A pause. "They wrote my father. Asked for ransom. Did he send it?" "No." Jonathan frowned. "He thought if I disappeared, it'd fix his problem." "What problem?" She looked away. "I knew things." Outside, the wind shifted, a dry rustle like bones in dead grass. Jonathan shut the door tight. Later, near midnight, came the knock. 3 slow raps. He hadn't lit the lamp, but the fire still glowed, casting long shadows on the cabin walls. Jonathan reached for the rifle and stepped to the door. He opened it a crack. A man stood there, dusty hat, long coat, eyes like snake glass. "Evenin'," the man drawled. Jonathan said nothing. "I'm lookin' for something that might have come limping through here. A girl. Skinny. Pale. Jonathan raised the rifle. She's not here. The man smiled. You sure? Jonathan stepped out onto the porch, cocked the hammer. You got 5 seconds to ride off. The stranger didn't blink, just tilted his head. All right, guess I'll be going, then. Then he lunged. Fast. Too fast. But Jonathan blocked the swing, brought the rifle up sideways, cracked it across the man's face. Bones snapped. Blood sprayed. The man staggered, then ran. Jonathan didn't shoot. He stood in the doorway, heart pounding. Behind him, Ellie was sitting up on the cot, staring at him with those wide, black-ringed eyes. Why didn't you kill him? She asked. Didn't have to. Her head tilted slightly. You should have. The next morning, they rode for San Claro. Jonathan knew the town well enough. What was left of it? Half the buildings burned down during the Silver Riots. Only one street still stood, and Sheriff Jack Holloway still wore the badge. He met them outside the old church, shotgun in hand. Reed, he said. Been a long time. Need a favor. Doesn't everyone? They rode back to the station. Jonathan told him about the canyon, the girl, the men. Holloway listened, then shook his head. Her name's not Marsh. Jonathan stiffened. She's Ellie, all right, but she didn't get kidnapped. She ran. Jonathan glanced at her. She says her father never replied to the ransom. He didn't, but not because he didn't know. Because he sent the men who wrote it. What? Holloway tossed a file on the desk. She knows things. About her daddy's mine. The men who disappeared there. Gold that never showed up on paper. Bodies that did. Jonathan opened the folder. Photos. Names. Contracts. Sealed maps. Ellie sat quietly in the corner, staring at nothing. He'll come, Holloway said. With others. Jonathan nodded. The girl didn't blink. Outside, thunder rumbled over the cliffs. They stayed the night in the sheriff's quarters above the San Claro jail, an old adobe building that smelled of ash and mothballs. The rain came heavy after midnight, turning the streets to mud and warping the wood of the broken church doors across the square. Jonathan sat by the window, watching for movement. Holloway dozed in a chair by the stove. Ellie lay curled on a cot, silent. But no one slept deeply. At dawn, Holloway pulled Jonathan aside. She's not safe here. Not for long. I'm not leaving her. I'm not asking you to. I'm telling you what's coming. You think Marsh is just some crooked land baron? He owns half the judges in El Paso, half the law west of the Pecos. The men who took her weren't bandits. They were hired. Hired to kill her? To silence her. She knows what's buried in that mine. Who put it there? And she's got papers to prove it. Jonathan looked toward the cot. She's just a child. Holloway's voice lowered. She's the only thing standing between her father and a massacre. You saw the ledger. Jonathan nodded. The folder contained names of men who had vanished. Miners who'd spoken of fraud, gold theft, unsafe shafts. A few were marked confirmed. Their bodies recovered, ruled accidental. Others just gone. No graves. No inquiries. Ellie had seen more than her father ever intended. Had followed him. Hidden in ledgers. Listened behind walls. And when she ran, she took proof. Jonathan asked her about it that morning. She stared into her tin cup. He's afraid. Not of the law. Of what the people might do if they knew. There are widows in Las Vegas who still think their husbands are coming back. Why tell me? Jonathan asked. You were the first man who didn't look at me like I was cargo. He had no answer. At noon, a boy came riding fast up the road. A runner from Holloway's contacts out east. His horse was lathered, his eyes wide with fear. They're coming, he said. 10 riders, maybe more. Uniforms. Badges. Guns. Marsh? Asked Holloway. The boy nodded. Him. And men that wear lawman stars, but ain't law. Jonathan's jaw tightened. How long? Less than an hour. Maybe 30 minutes. Holloway turned to Ellie. We need to go. She shook her head. I'm done running. He blinked. What do you mean? I'm not the only one with copies. There's a lawyer in Albuquerque. A priest in Tucson. They'll release everything if I die. My father knows that. He won't risk killing me if he sees the town stand behind me. You're gambling with your life. I'm claiming it. Jonathan's chest swelled, not with pride, but with fear. The kind that only comes when you realize you're standing beside someone braver than you. They prepared the office like a fort. Rifles loaded. Stove pushed against the front door. Holloway gave Ellie a whistle, 3 short bursts if they needed to run. She tucked it into her dress. Outside, storm clouds thickened. The horizon glowed with the flicker of distant lightning. Then came the riders. 11 in all. The first 6 wore dark coats, star-shaped badges glinting on their chests. But they weren't here to make arrests. Not with the way they dismounted, fast, eyes scanning, hands near their holsters. Marsh came last. He wore a white hat, clean boots, and a calmness that chilled the air. He walked to the jailhouse steps, looked up at Holloway's window. "You have something of mine," he said. Holloway pushed open the shutters. "Your daughter's not property, Harold. She's my blood. That makes her mine." "No," Jonathan said, stepping beside Holloway. "It doesn't." Marsh's eyes locked on his. "You the one who cut her loose? I'm the one who'll put you down if you take one more step." Marsh smiled. He signaled with his hand. His men moved, 3 to the saloon roof, 2 behind the church. The rest spread across the street. "Sheriff," he called, "I'll give you one chance. Send her out. She gets in my wagon. No one dies." "She's not going anywhere," Holloway replied. Marsh exhaled. "Then I'll burn this place down with you in it." The first shot came from behind the livery, a warning shot meant to scare. But Ellie didn't flinch. Jonathan turned. "You stay behind me." She nodded once, then raised her voice toward the door. "Harold Marsh." The name cut through the street like a blade. "You always said gold was weightless, that it lifted you out of dirt and sin. But you lied. It sank you. It buried everyone who ever trusted you. And now I'll tell the whole world. You're bluffing," Marsh shouted. "I mailed the letters myself." Silence. A long one. Then came the roar. A gunshot cracked from the saloon rooftop. It shattered the window beside Ellie's head. Jonathan pulled her down. Holloway returned fire. A rider screamed and fell from the roof. The shootout began. Bullets tore through wood. Lamps shattered. Smoke filled the hall. Jonathan shot 2 men trying to breach the side. Holloway took a graze to the shoulder but kept firing. Ellie crawled across the floor, dragging papers into a tin box. Then something shifted. A man, face covered in coal dust, staggered into view from behind the church. He raised his rifle, then turned, and shot one of Marsh's guards in the back. Jonathan froze. More miners appeared. Men who'd vanished, now reappearing like ghosts from the alleys. Dirty, bruised, but alive. They'd been hiding, waiting, and now they fought. One of Marsh's own turned and threw down his gun. Another fled. Within minutes, the rest were surrounded. Marsh stood alone, staring at the rifle in his hand, then slowly let it fall to the dirt. He looked at Ellie. "I should have left you in the cradle. You left me the day you chose gold over people." Holloway stepped forward and cuffed him. Later, as the bodies were collected and fires stamped out, Jonathan found Ellie sitting on the courthouse steps, holding the tin box on her lap. She looked up. "Still think I'm something inhuman?" He sat beside her. "No, just something more." She handed him the box. Inside were the letters, maps, documents, but also a photograph, old, faded. A woman and child. Her mother. "She tried to stop him," Ellie said. "And he buried her too." Jonathan felt the wind shift. This time, it felt clean, like something leaving, not arriving. By dawn, San Claro had fallen silent. Not the quiet of peace, but the stillness that follows a storm. A silence filled with soot and splintered wood, empty cartridge shells glinting in the gutters. Jonathan stood in the doorway of the jailhouse, rifle slung over his shoulder, watching the sun rise over broken rooftops. Harold Marsh was locked in the lone cell, wrists chained, eyes sunken. He hadn't spoken since the gunfire ended. Didn't even flinch when a miner came to the bars and spit at his boots. Ellie hadn't gone near the jail. She spent that morning in the back room of Holloway's office, sorting papers by candlelight. The tin box lay open beside her. Contracts, ledger pages, maps with red ink marks. Her handwriting had grown smaller overnight, more precise, as if each word had become weightier. When Jonathan brought her coffee, she didn't look up. "You should rest," he said. "I did. You didn't." She set her pen down. "If I stop now, it all gets forgotten. Like it always does." "Not this time." "Why not?" she asked and finally met his eyes. "Because they shot each other in the street? Because my father's in a cage?" He didn't answer. Outside, the town stirred slowly. The blacksmith hammered out a bent rifle barrel. The widow McClellan swept her steps clean of ash. A child found a bullet casing in the street and held it up like a coin. By noon, Holloway came with news. Riders were coming. Jonathan stepped off the porch. "Who?" "Federal marshals," Holloway said. "3 of them. Sent by telegram this morning. Fast riders, full authority." Ellie stood in the doorway. "That's not good." Holloway hesitated. "Could be. Could mean trial, protection. Could mean something else." She crossed her arms. "They're coming to bury this. Then we stand in the way." An hour later, the riders arrived. 3 men. Black coats. Iron-gray mustaches. One carried a folder tucked into his saddlebag. Another bore a rifle too clean for trail work. They dismounted before the sheriff's office without speaking. The leader stepped forward, flashing a tin star etched with a federal seal. "I'm Marshal Bennett. We're here to take custody of Harold Marsh." Holloway kept his stance steady. "On whose orders?" The marshal handed over a document. "Signed by Judge Wainwright in Santa Fe. Emergency jurisdiction. Direct transfer to Fort Eden for military inquiry." Jonathan read the paper twice. "Military?" "He sold weapons through shell companies," the marshal replied. "To hostile parties. The Army wants answers." Ellie stepped out behind them. "The Army wants silence," she said. "They want him to vanish in the middle of the desert before anyone asks questions." Marshal Bennett turned. "And you are?" "His daughter." The man's face barely changed. "Miss Marsh, we're not here to harm you." "No," she said. "Just to disappear the only witness with proof." The second marshal opened the jail door. Jonathan stepped between them. "You'll wait," he said. "Or what?" The third marshal said, his hand brushing his holster. "Or I'll bury you beside the men your boss sent yesterday." For a long moment no one moved. Then Holloway nodded. "You'll take him, but we'll be sending copies of every ledger and statement to the press, to the governor, and to the church archives in Tucson." Marshal Bennett raised an eyebrow. "You have documentation? Enough to fill a courtroom. Then we'll expect to see it. We're not in the business of hiding corruption." Ellie's laugh was short. "You just wear better hats while doing it." Still, there was nothing left to say. Marsh was led from his cell in irons. He didn't struggle, didn't speak, just kept his eyes low, until he passed Ellie. Then he stopped. "I should have left you in that desert," he whispered. She didn't flinch. "You did." He was loaded into the wagon and driven away. His boots disappeared beneath the curtain. Dust rose behind the wheels. And that was the last anyone in San Claro ever saw of Harold Marsh. For 2 days, the town was quiet again. But something had changed. The mine reopened, not under Marsh's name, but under a cooperative charter signed by the surviving miners. The church bell rang for the first time in years. The children stopped carrying sticks like rifles. And Ellie? She wrote. She wrote letters to editors, affidavits for courts, instructions for messengers. She mailed pages to Fort Worth, Santa Fe, Denver. Every morning, a fresh stack left with the mail rider. Jonathan helped where he could, built a lean-to behind Holloway's office, cleaned bullet holes from the porch rail. But she didn't speak much. Not until the 4th day. She found him in the general store holding a coil of wire. "I want to go back," she said. He nodded once. "To the shack. To the beginning." That afternoon they saddled up and left San Claro behind. No one tried to stop them. They returned to Jonathan's land, 30 miles west of anywhere. The old shack had half a roof left. The well still worked. Coyotes had dug under the woodpile. Ellie stood in the doorway, looking at the desert. Still haunted, Jonathan shrugged. Only if you believe in ghosts. They started rebuilding the next day. The roof first, then the floorboards, then the fence around the old garden plot. She planted seeds with her sleeves rolled high, drew water from the well without complaint. She kept the tin box near the stove, now filled with fresh envelopes and letters. Some nights, she woke screaming, dreams of chains, smoke, the canyon. Other nights, she sat with Jonathan on the porch, watching the stars without speaking. In November, the Territorial Observer ran the full story. Headline in bold black ink. Marsh legacy exposed. Miners testify. Daughter speaks out. The article listed 23 names of the missing, 14 of the dead, 3 locations where gold had been stored off books. Testimony from 2 clerks, 1 priest, and Ellie herself. It reached Santa Fe, then the east. An inquiry opened, but Jonathan didn't tell her that. She didn't need to hear what she already knew. Instead, they planted onions in the new bed and checked the irrigation lines. A pair of deer passed by once, and neither of them raised a gun. By January, snow dusted the canyon walls. They built a greenhouse. In March, the aqueduct channel was finished. It ran cold water straight from the cliff basin to the garden, as she'd drawn in her plans. That night, they sat on the porch. I thought it'd feel like something, she said. What? Victory. He thought for a long time. It doesn't. It feels like breathing again. She nodded, then handed him a folded envelope. He opened it. Inside was a letter from the office of Judge Wainwright. Harold Marsh had died in custody. Fell from a prison walkway during a transfer. No witnesses. No photographs. No body returned. Ellie stared at the firelight. They killed him. Jonathan didn't answer. She folded the letter again and tossed it into the flames. I don't want revenge, she said softly. I want roots. You have them, he replied. And they sat in silence as the fire burned low, the desert stretching wide and empty around them, full of the kind of quiet that only comes after truth is spoken, and nothing more needs to be said. Spring arrived late. The canyon clung to winter longer than usual, frost lingering on the garden rows each dawn. But Ellie never missed a morning. Wrapped in her shawl, she walked the plot with a notebook in hand, recording each sprout, each struggle. Jonathan watched from the porch, silent. She had grown into the rhythm of the land without complaint. One morning, she pointed to a crooked corn stalk. This one's bent, she said, but still growing. He nodded. Like its gardener. She smiled, the kind that took time to return but stayed once it did. They fenced the garden that week. Coyotes had been sniffing around, though nothing was taken. Still, Ellie insisted. We've planted too much to risk it now. That Sunday, Holloway rode in alone. His horse limped. His coat smelled of distant fires. He handed Ellie a folded letter. The inquiry's over, he said. They named a few men. The rest swept under. She unfolded the page, skimmed it. And Marsh died en route to Fort Eden. Fell from a walkway. Official story. Jonathan saw her shoulders lift, then drop. No relief, no grief. Just a quiet end to a long shadow. They offered restitution, Holloway added. A trust, land, compensation. For what? She asked. For silence. Ellie shook her head. Give it to the widows, the families who lost more than money. He nodded, then looked to Jonathan. I've got what I need. That night, wind howled across the ridge. Ellie stood by the well, eyes fixed on the stars. He's still there, she whispered. Not in body, just in the quiet, in the weight of it. Jonathan stepped beside her. Then we'll plant louder than he ever spoke. The next morning, they dug the well deeper, reinforced the stone. The water that rose was clear and cold. Ellie cupped it in her hands and laughed. Light and free. A week later, she nailed a sign to the fence. Marsh Garden. open to all. Travelers began to come. A preacher, a widowed mother, a wandering boy. They traded seed for bread, stories for beans. Some stayed the night. Ellie greeted each one with calm kindness. She offered warmth without asking anything back. One afternoon, a young girl arrived barefoot holding a drawing. She handed it to Ellie without a word. The image showed a flower growing from stone. "It's from my father," she said. "He worked in the mine." Ellie clutched the paper to her chest. Her eyes shimmered. That night, as the stars returned, she sat beside Jonathan by the fire. "We'll need to repair the irrigation line," she said. "And dig deeper rows," he replied. She nodded. There were no grand plans. Only earth, water, and two people choosing to stay. The garden grew full and untamed by midsummer. Tomatoes burst through their cages. Squash vines crept along the edges of the cabin. Wild mint sprang up between the rows. The old cottonwood near the well, long thought dead, had bloomed, casting pale blossoms that drifted through the yard like bits of ash in sunlight. Ellie spent her mornings barefoot in the soil, sleeves rolled, notebook in hand. She hummed softly while she worked, sometimes a tune she'd picked up from a passing traveler, sometimes nothing at all. Her hands were stained with soil and sun, and her eyes had begun to hold peace. Not every day, but enough. Jonathan watched from the porch most mornings. Not as a guardian anymore, but as someone learning to stand beside her. That summer, the land gave more than it had in a decade. Carrots, beans, onions, corn. They dried what they could, traded the rest to riders who passed through, widows, surveyors, drifters, even a preacher who had once blessed a massacre and now sought absolution beneath their roof. Ellie welcomed them all, fed them, gave them seeds, asked nothing in return. "They don't have to pay," she said one evening. "Just keep the growing going." Then came a letter, sealed in red wax. The postman was a boy on a gray mule. He refused to meet Jonathan's eyes as he handed it over. Ellie read it by lamplight. "They're challenging the land claim," she said, "saying it still belongs to the Marsh estate. A judge in Santa Fe wants testimony." Again, Jonathan folded his arms. "You want to go?" She looked toward the window. The wind stirred the curtains. The stars were faint that night, like they too were deciding whether to stay. "No," she said. "They want me to come, so they can shut me up in a marble room and smile while they cut pieces off what we built. I'm not giving them that." "What happens if you don't go?" "They'll send someone." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Let them." She set the letter in the fireplace, watched it curl and blacken. The next day, she planted a new row of wildflowers beneath the cottonwood. "If we have to fight," she said, "we won't do it in court. We'll do it with roots." August brought heat and strange visitors. A man with a newspaper badge came asking for quotes. A rider from Fort Eden appeared with questions and left with a basket of onions and no answers. A miner's wife from Las Vegas came with her children. She wept when she saw Ellie. "My husband never came home from Marsh's mine," she said. "I used to think he left us. Now I know he was buried." Ellie knelt in the garden with the woman's youngest child, showing her how to spot ripe beans. "Take whatever you need," she said. "This place is for people who weren't counted." By September, the second room on the cabin was finished. Jonathan built it himself. Rough pine walls, a window facing east, shelves made from salvaged barn wood. Ellie moved her tin box there, along with her books, her seed jars, and the drawing from the girl who once came barefoot with a picture of a flower growing from stone. Autumn brought yellow winds and the hush of waiting. The harvest filled their arms. They made jam, dried corn, canned tomatoes. Travelers grew fewer, but some returned, just to sit in silence on the porch. "I never thought land could forgive," one man said. "But this place remembers the good." Jonathan rarely spoke when they came. Ellie did most of the talking, but sometimes he caught her watching him. Not in fear, not in doubt, but with quiet trust. Like the land, she was learning to believe again. One evening, as fire cracked in the stove, she brought him a paper wrapped in twine. "A deed," she said. He frowned. To what? To the cabin, the well, the garden. I don't need. I do, she said gently. I need to know if anything happens to me. This won't disappear into someone's ledger. He unwrapped it, folded it once, and slid it into the tin box beside hers. It won't, he said. October came with early frost. They hauled water at dawn, covered rows with burlap, and kept the fire burning through the night. One night, a rider came fast, boots muddy, breath steaming. Judge Wainwright died, he said. Last week. Poison. They're saying it's linked to Marsh's case. Ellie sat silent for a long while after he left. Then, they're still tying off the old knots. Jonathan poured 2 cups of coffee. You want to keep fighting? No, she said. I want to keep planting. Later that week, they found hoofprints along the outer fence. Fresh ones. Why, someone had ridden close, watched from a distance. Didn't come to the door. Didn't speak. Jonathan loaded his rifle. Ellie stayed quiet. They'll try to scare us, he said. They already tried. And I'm still here. She paused, then added, and so are you. The wind that night howled like it used to, but didn't bite like before. In early November, the cottonwood shed the last of its bloom. Ellie gathered the petals and pressed them in her journal. She labeled the page. Year 1. Thanksgiving passed quietly. A pot of stew, a loaf of bread, and 2 candles burning low. Ellie read aloud a letter from a girl in Santa Rosa. A girl whose family had received seeds, planted them, and now had their own garden. I named one of the tomato plants Ellie, the letter read. She's strong. Ellie folded it and placed it in the box beside the deed. That's enough, she said. That's all I needed. Winter arrived with little warning. Snow covered the fields in a single night. Coyotes came close to the fences, and birds vanished. The road to San Claro iced over. They didn't expect visitors, and none came. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading, writing, talking, sometimes not talking at all. Ellie took to painting. She covered one cabin wall with tiny images. Flowers, wheat, stars. A single dark canyon with a fire at its center. She never explained them. Jonathan never asked. But one night, after she'd gone to bed, he touched the edge of the canyon painting with one calloused finger. He remembered that night, and how it had ended differently than it should have. In late February, the frost melted. Snowmelt filled the well. Seeds were sorted again. The garden would start over. Ellie stood at the porch rail, staring toward the horizon. They'll always want it back, she said. The land. The peace. Jonathan nodded. Then we keep it harder. She turned. With bullets. No, he said. With truth. With stubborn hope. The wind lifted her hair. She looked young again. Then older. Then just like herself. In early March, she opened a packet labeled simply Spring and began again. One row at a time. One root at a time. A place that once held ghosts now grew food. Now held names. Now held her. And him. And more than either of them had expected. By spring, the garden hummed with life again. The frost had passed, and with it, the long silence winter brought. Corn pushed up in clean lines. Radishes bloomed bright red beneath the soil. A windmill spun slow and steady above the cabin, creaking like an old hymn. The sound wasn't lonely anymore. It was rhythm. Ellie moved through the rows like someone memorizing a prayer. She didn't talk much while she worked, but her hands told their own stories. Sewing, tying, brushing dirt from stems. There was peace in it. Not the fragile peace that comes after victory, but the kind built with effort, day by day, on land once too quiet. Jonathan had taken to building again. A new shed, a fence expansion, a covered bench near the cottonwood, now blooming without prompting. One morning, he found Ellie there with 2 sacks beside her. One of seeds, one of tools. She looked up. We'll need to fix the west line. There's a leak near the sycamore. I'll dig it after breakfast, he said. No mention of war. No mention of marsh or guns or courts. Just irrigation. The morning sun caught in her hair, And for a brief second, Jonathan saw something unexpected. An echo of the girl he'd found in the canyon, but also something far beyond her. A woman rooted in her own story, not the wreckage of someone else's. He smiled. She didn't notice. She was already unfolding blueprints. By April, the first travelers returned. A pair of sisters from Santa Fe. A one-armed scout looking for seed potatoes. A teacher from Silver Flats who wanted to trade ink for dried mint. They ate under the cottonwood. Ellie passed out planting notes. Jonathan fixed a broken wagon wheel with an iron brace and some stubborn patience. That night, as the guests camped near the riverbed, Ellie sat beside the fire with her knees pulled to her chest. Jonathan handed her a tin mug of tea. "Think they'll stay?" "Maybe," she said. "Maybe not." "Do you want them to?" She considered it. "I want them to remember what quiet feels like. Real quiet. The kind you grow, not the kind that follows something burning." The fire popped softly between them. He took a sip. "You ever think about leaving?" "I did," she said. "Once. And now, I've got roots." He didn't press her further. In May, a writer came bearing news. Another mining scandal, different state, same story. A crooked baron. Missing men. Muffled facts. Ellie shook her head. It never ends. Jonathan expected anger, maybe frustration, but she just folded the newspaper and slid it into the stove. "We planted truth here," she said. "That's enough for me. Let someone else carry the next seed." He wanted to say something. Something about her courage, her endurance. But words didn't come easy to him, and she didn't need them anyway. Later that evening, they walked the edge of the ridge where wild grass had grown tall. Ellie stopped near a broken post and knelt. "I'm going to build a marker here," she said, "for the ones no one buried." Jonathan nodded. Not a gravestone, just a place to remember. They carved the names together, those she knew, those the miners gave them, even a few that no one could verify but felt true enough to write down. They dug the base deep, set the post upright. On the wooden plaque, Ellie wrote, "Here we remember what was lost, what was planted, and what grew again." The next morning, the wind turned warm. Children came with baskets and helped pick berries. One of them gave Ellie a drawing, her garden with flowers taller than the sky. "Is that how you see it?" Ellie asked. The girl nodded. "It's the only place I've been where the ground isn't angry." Jonathan watched Ellie's eyes brim. But she didn't cry. She just said, "Then help us keep it that way." By June, a second well had been dug. The lower garden thrived. Letters came from places they'd never seen. From Kansas, from Utah, from Mexico. Letters with names and seeds and thanks. Jonathan built a small cubby in the cabin for them. Ellie called it the voice box. "If I ever lose my way," she said, "I'll listen to them." He told her she never would. She smiled but didn't answer. In July, Holloway visited. He looked older, thinner, but he brought a basket of peaches and a new story about a young sheriff out west who'd closed a mine without waiting for a judge. "Said your name gave him courage," Holloway said. Ellie handed him a glass of water. "Then he's braver than me. I just didn't know when to stop." They sat under the cottonwood while the sun sank low, and for the first time in months, Jonathan heard Holloway laugh. Not the forced kind. The kind that starts in the ribs and means something. Before he left, he stood by the gate and said, "If the world had more places like this," Ellie finished it for him, "it wouldn't need sheriffs." He tipped his hat and rode out. That night it rained. They didn't go inside, just stood on the porch and let it soak through their clothes. "This is the last part of healing," she said. "What is?" "Letting it fall, and knowing it won't wash it all away." In the morning, the ground glistened. They went to the garden. No weeds, no rot, just everything where it belonged. Jonathan kneeled beside a row of new squash and ran his hand through the damp soil. He looked up at Ellie. "Feels like a beginning." She nodded. "There are always new things to grow."